груши поплыли туманы над рекой. Выходила на берег Катюша, на высокий берег, на крутой. Выходила на берег Катюша, на высокий берег, на крутой.
Welcome to the Boys Club, where we focus on a Marxist-Leninist perspective from thems and thems. Listen for a while. Maybe you can learn something. I'm joined with my coolest comrades, the Ride or Dies, Lumpy, Ash, and Comrade Crazy. I've been busy recently and I've missed you all. So first off, how are you all doing?
I'm okay. Been hanging in there.
I've been doing good. I've been doing great, and just chilling, being a communist, doing my thing. The only thing you can really do. Right. And probably reading some Lenin and Marx and, all the boring, nerdy stuff. But other than that, I've just been good.
Heck yeah. How are you doing, Ash?
I'm good. I'm just over on TikTok debating and doing some other stuff in my personal life. We missed you too. It did.
Yeah. I'm sorry I've been absent. Hopefully I was kind of in a funk. So I think I'm getting a little bit better, getting back on track with everything. So I'll be around a lot more. But now that we have caught up, it's time to get into the reason we're here today. Before we begin, I'd like to give a warning to everyone listening. What we're discussing today is potentially triggering. It's real life. It's actually happening. It's the reality that we are living, that a lot of people here are living. So if you're sensitive to information involving ICE, disappearances, death as well, this episode might not be the one for you. Just like last episode, the trigger warning still holds. Last episode, Crazy, Ash, Lumpy, and I discussed the history of immigration here in the US, basically what led us to this point, providing a timeline that tied up to what we're discussing today, the current climate of immigration, particularly with the creation of ICE and what that means. We felt that today the best way to start the episode would be going over recent cases, which I will be handling. So first off, one thing I want to talk about, which will lead into what Ash is going to discuss, is the alarming rate of missing children, particularly those who are kidnapped, taken forcefully by ICE. I wanted to go over some particularly egregious cases. A lot of these you might already know of because of the news if you keep track of it. But I'm just going to go over some particular cases. The first one I want to talk about that has been making the rounds on TikTok and social media. So Liam Ramos was seen being basically held captive by ICE, wearing, being adorable, wearing a little blue coat, plaid coat, and a blue knit bunny hat. 5 years old. He stood in his driveway in his suburban home in Minneapolis. He was surrounded by masked federal ICE agents. One agent held the handle of his Spider-Man backpack as Liam and his father were placed into a black SUV. They were transported more than 1,300 miles away to a family detention facility in Texas. So Minneapolis to Texas. There are circumstances leading to their arrest, which, remember, Liam's only 5 years old, remains disputed. Another recent case was Emmanuel Gonzalez. This happened October of last year. Emmanuel walked away from his mother's fruit stand in Houston to find a bathroom. Emmanuel is a disabled teenager. He became lost, and after hours of searching, his mother filed a missing persons report. Firefighters found Emmanuel about 24 hours later. Instead of reuniting him with his mother, the Houston Police Department transferred him to immigration authorities, and he was in immigration detention for about 48 days, despite his mother requesting for his release. Another one that really made the kind of like the social media rounds. I remember seeing this one particularly was Yon Sin. Yon Sin is the child of Fei Zhong. He is 6 years old. He was detained during a routine immigration check-in at a New York court. They were arrested and immediately separated. It took Fei Zhong weeks to find out where his child was. When they did finally reunite them, the Department of Homeland Security had confirmed that they had been deported back to China. Yan Xin was, in school, just started like first grade. Basically, it started creating a life here in the United States and was immediately separated from everything he knew. And of course, just the horror of being a father, doing what you were supposed to, going to a routine check, like you're supposed to, and then, having your child taken and not knowing where they were. Another one that's still currently ongoing, it's really, really concerning, is Caroline Ferreira de Mora. On May 8th of last year, federal agents detained 3 women and a baby on Eureka Street. This family included 13-year-old Carolina Ferreira de Mora. Her mother is still in an immigration detention center in Texas. Caroline was placed in the care of the Department of Children and Family, but she was soon after, she was no longer in state custody. Her family attorney has said that she might have qualified for a juvenile visa, but they still have no idea where 13-year-old Caroline really is. She is still missing. So they think that she had gotten released, and that's the last they've heard of her. Elvis Echeverria, he is an Ecuadorian man with, he had an open asylum case, and he was arrested outside his Minneapolis home. Agents had broken a window in his vehicle and removed him and his 2-year-old daughter. Within 8 hours, both were on a flight to Texas family detention centers. The toddler, by judge order, has been told to be returned to Minnesota prior to the transfer, but ICE didn't listen. So the 2-year-old, even before they were transferred, she was forcefully taken to another state, to a detention center. And that's another case I wanted to focus on. Those were just some recent cases I wanted to focus in on children, because it seems like a lot of children have no options here. They have no freedoms. We've talked about this before in our own personal conversations, and I know Ash is gonna expand on this. Kind of in our current capitalist society, in our current conditions, we are constantly reminded how children literally have the least amount of rights. And we're seeing very rapidly how ICE targets and utilizes children and separates children from their families. And it's really important to bring this up because of how absolutely horrifying it is. Like, we have to be at a point of like fascism that we are completely fine. Not saying us, we're fine, but our system is fine with knowing that children are just gone. But that's not the only thing that ICE has been doing that has been horrifying. The next portion of recent cases I want to discuss are the deaths that have occurred under ICE and under, immigration detention. Another thing I wanted to bring up before I go into one of the more serious topics is the recent attention towards Indigenous people here in the United States who are being targeted by ICE. One of them is the Oglala Sioux tribe members. In January of this year, 4 enrolled members of the Oglala Sioux tribe were taken in custody during ICE operations in Minneapolis. 3 were transferred to Fort Snelling. Fort Snelling serves as an internment camp during the winter of 1862 to 1863, where approximately 1,700 Dakota elders, women, and children were forcefully confined. So 3 of those tribe members were taken to an internment camp of their ancestors. Tribal leaders stated that detained individuals are United States citizens and citizens of the Oglala Sioux Nation. The tribe is denied entering into any immigration enforcement agreement and requested clarification regarding the legal basis of their detentions. But now I'm going to move on to recent cases of the deaths that have happened under ICE within just 2026. Surprisingly, a high number. I'm sure there's even more that we might not even know about. I'm not trying to say that it has happened, but we know just from since today, there has been at least 8 people who have died in ICE custody or with encounters with federal agents within the year of 2026. The first one is Luis Caceres. He was 42 from Honduras. He died on January 5th in an HCA Houston Healthcare in Conroe, Texas. He had been arrested in November and transferred to the Joe Corley Processing Center. After multiple medical emergencies, he remained in intensive care in a detention center until his death. The next one is Geraldo Campos. He was 55, a Cuban immigrant and a father of 4. He died on January 3rd at Camp East Mountain in El Paso, Texas. The autopsy came back as homicide. A witness told the Associated Press he had been restrained and placed in a chokehold. The next one is Victor Diaz, 36, from Nicaragua, died on January 14th at Camp East, Montana. ICE agents reported that he was found unresponsive in his room, and the death has been presumed a suicide and is pending investigation. Next one is Parati Law, 46, a Cambodian immigrant. He died on January 9th at Thomas Jefferson University Hospital in Philadelphia. He had been found unresponsive at a federal detention center while receiving treatment for drug withdrawal. Next one is probably the one we know of the most. That's Renee Nicole Good, 37, a Minneapolis resident and mother of 3. She was fatally shot by a federal agent on January 7th. The next one is Luis Yanez Cruz. He was 68. He was a Honduran immigrant and father of 3. He died on January 6th at John F. Kennedy Memorial Hospital in Indio, California, after experiencing heart-related issues while in detention. Next is Herbert Dominguez, 34, from Mexico. He died on January 14th at the Robert A. Dayton Detention Center in Lovejoy, Georgia. He had been arrested for driving without a license and was awaiting removal proceedings. Other than that, there wasn't much on what happened for his cause of death. Finally, we have another one that has been making the rounds, which I do want to note. I think it is, though both of these have been horrible, that we do tend to focus on the 2 white people that were attacked by ICE, which is, instead of the people who have passed away while being, detained without any rights. But the last one is Alex Jeffrey Preddy, was a 37-year-old ICU nurse in Minneapolis and was shot multiple times and killed by United States Customs and Border Protection officers during a federal immigration enforcement operation in the Whittier neighborhood. And it just happened weeks after a separate federal agent killed Renee Good in Minneapolis as well. But other than that, that is pretty much all I have. I know it sets a really heavy tone for this episode, but I think it's important to remind ourselves from the get-go that we're not just talking about this to talk about it. There are real people being affected. There are real people who have lost their lives. And I hope that as we continue, if you're listening, that you take this in, you take it seriously and think about what is to be done. But I'm going to move it over to Ash, who is going to focus on the children and mothers particularly affected by what's going on.
Thank you, Nico. That's a really good overview. I'm also going to be talking a lot about Dilley, Texas. Dilley, Texas is where they hold the families. It's a family detention center. It was opened by Obama in 2014. This year alone, there has been around 3,500 individuals in and out of that detainment center. The conditions there, they are holding children, very, very young children, by the way, in soft-sided tents, chain link partitions, and trailers, like trailer bungalow buildings. It is overcrowded. They are being refused medical care. Many of the children are reported to be lethargic, sleeping a lot. They're very clearly traumatized. Many of them are age regressing. So things like they were once potty trained. Now they're wetting themselves. They're in a state of malnutrition. I mean, I honestly could go on and on and on about the way the children are being treated is absolutely horrendous. There have also been footage and reports of the children screaming and chanting, "Let us out." This is being ignored. The journalists who are outside of this detention center where they legally are allowed to be with their cameras are being threatened with violence and force and legal repercussion by the border enforcement agents. Also, and I don't know if many people know this, they also transport pregnant teenagers to this facility. There are more than a dozen. It's difficult to know exactly how many teenage girls who are pregnant in this facility who are being denied medical care. Also, it is illegal to get an abortion in Texas. They're denied because of their age, because of their status. They're denied access to abortion completely. They are essentially being forced to stay pregnant. So these children actually have a legal right to be released, and this is being completely and totally ignored. In addition to pregnant teenagers, there are also pregnant and nursing women who are being held in these detention centers. Federal judges have sounded the alarms about their treatment. They are being neglected. They're denied treatment. The ACLU wrote a letter in October 2025 demanding their release. Pregnant women are reported to be shackled and chained. So ICE is going against its own directive that says that they do not detain pregnant women. So according to the federal regulation, pregnant women qualify for release. So I want to read a statement from one of the women that is detained, that was pregnant. It is going to be incredibly triggering. It is going to deal with like miscarriage and things like that. So the reason that I'm reading this is because I really want to emphasize, just like we talked about in our last episode where we talked about this being eugenics, this is still eugenics. This is 100% eugenics, what is happening right here. So they did not give us her real name, obviously. So the name that she's going by in this is Alicia. So in April 2025, Alicia arrived for her routine ICE check-in in Louisiana. She was detained without warning. She was sent to Basil. She soon discovered she was pregnant. She was taken to a local hospital for a blood test, but no one explained her medical treatment or provided interpretation. In detention, she received small portions of poor quality food that left her feeling weak and hungry. By May, Alicia began experiencing severe abdominal pain, cramping, and bleeding. She reported her symptoms to facility staff, who transported her to an emergency room where medical personnel informed an invasive uterine test without her consent and injected her with an unknown medication. And then she was later informed that she had miscarried. No one interpreted. She was not given medical care. She was not told what was happening. She does not know what they injected her with. So as it stands right now, just to go back to the children for a second. So the majority of states do not track parents' immigration status. So they don't track that at all. So currently, as it stands, there are more than 6 million children, 5.3 million of them being U.S. citizens, who are at risk of being separated from at least one parent. And I believe it's about 1 in 3 of them are at risk of being put into foster care. And then once they're in foster care, they're essentially lost in the system. We saw this happen with Biden's administration. We saw it happen in Trump's. The DHS claims that they do not separate families, but like we know with some of the cases that Nico read off, that is absolutely 100% not true. So DHS claims that they ask if the person that they are detaining, the adult, wants the children to be removed with them, or ICE will place the children with an adult. This is not like a real choice. Like they're essentially saying, would you like to take your child to a concentration camp with you? Or would you like us to place the child with someone else? So, I'm sorry, I was going to talk about Liam, but Nico covered that, and I'm really happy that they did. The only good news that I have to share is that Liam Conejo Ramos was ordered to be returned to his family a few weeks ago, and he is doing much better. And he said that he's very excited to go see his classmate. But he should have never been removed in the first place. His mother was inside the home. His mother was pregnant. She was instructed to not open the door. And then there were several neighbors and community members that were there on the spot who offered to take Liam, as well as a superintendent from his school district who was present. And they still refused.
Yeah, no, thank you, Ash, for, I know that's a lot to have to share and talk about. We're going to move over to Lumpy, or Janet, as the screen says, about the ramping up that we are seeing happening.
Yeah, so my section is about the ramp ups, and I could just sit here and run through numbers like how there were an additional 12,000 agents added in 2025 to the 10,000 they had in 2024, more than doubling the numbers. How the budgeted money for ICE shot up over 8 times the average $10 billion they got the year before to $85 billion, and that just keeps growing. How collaboration between ICE and local police has shot up 950%, with 1,372 agreements, up from 135 that were in place in January 2025. How there are more deaths being reported in ICE custody, up from the average of 8, and we already reached 8, as Nico pointed out, this year, and we're, as we're recording this, we're just near the end of February. So the average over the lifetime of ICE has been 8. But just last year, that shot up to 32. How there is a record high, how there are record high cases of people claiming their imprisonment is illegal, with the analysis of habeas cases since 2009 showing that immigrants have filed more challenges to their detention in the first 13 months of Trump's second term than in the last 3 administrations combined. How there is a proposal of 24 new facilities being made nationwide in warehouses that will be designed to hold anywhere from 1,500 to 10,000 people each. how it appears that more U.S. citizens are being taken into custody by ICE, but since it isn't kept track of, this is hard to tell, and so on. But I'm going to focus just on a few aspects about the ramp ups I think are important for people to understand, because this is not just a Trump thing. It is systemic. And that system was primed by both Republicans and Democrats before we got what we have today. Just touching back on that point about the 24 warehouse facilities, there's some reporting that has come out. Actually, they were talking about this. CNN had talked about it back in August, that the military, they were going to use like the military to help get these facilities and stuff. So it seems like they're kind of putting the funding into the military, and it falls under this naval, the budget. And what people were seeing in that budget that was like added to were some disturbing things. And one of the things they saw, and this may not have to do with the 24, I could not find that it directly has to do with the new facilities, but on that same list is they're looking for medical biohazard waste incinerators. So that has some people pretty concerned. And as I was saying too, is that even if that had nothing to do with the ICE facilities, we just went through the pandemic with COVID, and we know how the government acted on that. So. And then in the last episode, how we got to ICE, I went through some of the history of the ramping up in the past administrations, like how the funding grew yearly, how family separations started under Obama, and this weird and dangerous race, it seems, between the presidents in the last few administrations to try to deport the most.
More people were deported under my husband and Barack Obama without killing American citizens and without putting children into detention camps than were in the first Trump term or this first year of Trump's second term. So I think it's important.
Hence, Trump putting a number on paper and looking to deport 1 million a year while he's in office, which they claim they have exceeded in 2025. However, in 2025, they deported about 605 to 675,000 at the border and in the interior combined. I'm not quite sure how there is a 70,000 person difference in that estimate number, but if you pay much attention to the US government, they are never good at keeping track of these things, especially when it involves people they don't care about. And that includes the children. So yeah, that number runs very short of 1 million, but DHS is claiming they got 1.9 million to self-deport, even though New York Times and Kaiser Consulting, among others, did an analysis of the numbers and said there wasn't anywhere near that amount, since records show the decrease in numbers of foreign-born people in the United States only went down 400,000 in that time frame, and that would include deaths in the ones deported from the interior. So Project Homecoming was the deal DHS made for immigrants, or I bet it's still out there on the board, immigrants to self-deport. If they signed up to leave, they would get a free flight and $1,000, which was raised to $2,600 later last year. The estimated number of people who did this is only 35,000 to 55,000, very short of the 1.9 million number, leaving one to wonder, where did the allocated money for the 1.9 million at 1,000 to 2,600 a pop go? And I bring this up, pointing at Trump's failure because the Dems love to taunt him about it, which forces Trump's ego to go even more fascistic with these outrageous demands. After Trump took office last year, the ramping up wasn't like before, with the slow buildup that was pretty much just happening without most of the public paying much attention. But there was always those of us that did pay attention, however. So we are not quite as shocked at the ramping up of the money and the numbers, or even the fact that Trump's DHS is hiring Patriot Front and Proud Boys to fill the ranks. I'm not saying this doesn't concern communists and others who actively watch these things. It has always been a concern to us whether the capitalist police state is strengthened. We were the ones sounding the warning bells all along. We were the ones that saw the overreach in 2002 when DHS was just a twinkle in W's eye. We knew if conditions remained the way they were going, the fascist elements were going to start rearing their ugly heads to those that don't pay attention, and those now seeing it were going to start reacting. So here we are, progressives coming at the protests with whimsy against a dystopian backdrop of agents getting a nod to untie their binds a bit more than usual. None of this is addressing the core issues, especially the fact that both Democrats and Republicans have supported and created this. One can't simply put this all on the current admin, no matter how horrific they are. If it weren't for family separations being allowed under Obama, they may not have happened under Trump's first term. With Biden not getting rid of some of the previous Trump admins ramping up, as he said he would, but instead utilizing those ramp ups and ramping up efforts himself, it paved the way for Trump to do what he is doing today. Then you have the Democratic core voters who seem to be fine with the horrific things like kids in cages and deaths of people being held in custody when happening under a Democratic-led country, but scream bloody murder when Trump is doing the same stuff. The Dems just do it quietly, and Trump makes it known that he wants all immigrants gone. And let's be honest, really mostly the brown and black ones, even though some of the white ones get tossed in for good measure. It's almost as if the Democratic core doesn't care what happens as long as they don't need to be bothered by it, and nothing bothers them more than having to hear about it. The Republican voters, on the other hand, have pretty much always been fine with any of this under either party's rule. This is all for show. Trump is a bully, and he likes to prove that. The agents involved in the shooting of Preddy were with CBP for at least 7 years each. One was even hired way back under the Obama administration. They're not, in particular, Trump's newly hired goons. They are seasoned vets with the agency, so this violence is rewarded in DHS. You can't call one side lesser evil in this when they full out helped build it brick by brick. One of the most wildest scenes I remember seeing in the last 5 years actually happened under Biden, and that was the border agents chasing down Haitians on horseback. I guess what I'm getting at is that this ramping up is manufactured in a way because the violence in the patrols has always been there. It's just that we are seeing it more because Trump's blusterous demands puts eyes on the situation. So the protesting, which happens to have been happening since DHS was created, surges as well. Law enforcers much prefer to do their violence without eyes on them, but bullies like to have their work watched. How else are they going to scare people into liking them, or at least scare them into civility? Let me reiterate, this is not to say that what Trump is doing is just your average run-of-the-mill operation that you shouldn't be any more concerned with than usual. It definitely is ramped up in ways everyone should definitely be concerned with, not only now, but in the future under other admins, if we make it there. Because the police state has been ramped up itself overall, and its might is used by both sides of the aisle. Notice how the Democrats' answer is not to abolish this horrific agency, but to reform it, and not even reform it in ways that would matter. They want to give it more money, just like they do cops. And as we see, the killings from cops numbers aren't going down. In fact, over the last few years, they've risen to over 1,300 a year killed by cops, in only 6 days in 2025 where they didn't kill anyone. The average just a few years back was about 1,100. The more the duopoly does all in its power to keep the capitalist hegemony, the more and more violence we will see in the world, and it will move closer and closer to every American citizen's doorstep. And now I shall veer off topic for just a minute. I don't know about you, but I was taught fascism is a bad thing, and throughout my life I fought it. Anyone capitulating to, or worse, making excuses for this madness is the enemy of the working class, which is the worldwide class most of us are kept in. So as communists, We are the defenders of the working class, and that fight is a worldwide one, not just nationalistic. Sadly, the goons doing the damage have more in common with us and the immigrants they are viciously rounding up, harming, and killing than they do with their masters who are letting them off their leash. But I guess being hated by a majority, 65% of American people, for possibly getting a $50,000 reward and a token depicting some horrific act you were involved in that you can look at while you wither away alone and hated seems worth it to those losers. That's all I got right now.
No, thank you, Lumpy. I really appreciate you discussing, like, even though there's what feels like a ramping up, that like as communists we have to use like historical materialism, because I was thinking like with Ash, like what they mentioned with the separation of children and the foster care system, I thought back to how Ash had brought it to my attention like half a year ago about Haitian children. We discussed it in the last episode, being detained at Guantanamo Bay, and a lot of those Haitian children ended up in our foster care system and kind of forgotten and lost, and we're seeing it happen again. And for me personally, and just as a real quick before we go to crazy, I had an undocumented parent, and the moment that I was most scared for my father was during the Obama administration. He had 6 months left to live. He was on basically hospice, and because we had put him into hospice, it had gotten notified that he, like, basically, immigration had gotten notified that he was an undocumented citizen or immigrant, and they threatened to deport him when we knew he only had 6 months left. I think that for me back then, it kind of really hit me how quickly they will dehumanize you for this idea of what an American citizen is. Even though my dad had basically lived here for my entire life, for my siblings who are all older than me, his entire life, had, grandkids and family, and didn't have anyone left to go back to. But yeah, that just a little thing, a little tangent. We're going to go to Comrade Crazy now, and Crazy is going to discuss what is to be done.
Hello everyone, I'm Comrade Crazy. You should know me from before. And I'll be telling you guys what is to be done, and thankfully that is the title of a book that has been written by a person that you should also know, called Vladimir Lenin. But it actually does not come from what is to be done. The book I'm going to be quoting today in some sections is actually State and Revolution, and it is the first chapter of State and Revolution. So if you want to do some reading, just read that first chapter. Pretty much everything you need to know is there. And I'm basically going to be going through the whole thing. And so really, to understand, what is to be done, we must understand what is. And what we have is that we have this funny little thing called a state. And the state exists as a product of the irreconcilability of class antagonisms. Now, some of y'all have probably never heard those words before, so we're going to break it down. First of all, what in the world does irreconcilability mean? Well, first of all, we have the base word reconcile, which means to come together, compromise, come to an agreement of some kind, especially after, a disagreement or argument of some kind, for, to reconcile, to come together, to compromise. So if something is irreconcilable, that means it cannot compromise, it cannot come together, it cannot possibly come together under a system, an agreement, a contract, a statement of whatever to be mutually beneficial or in cooperation. It cannot happen. And so the irreconcilability of class antagonisms. What are class antagonisms? Well, the best way you probably understand that is through the word contradiction and class contradiction. And classes are, of course, the capitalist class, the proletariat class, in relation to your means of production. And so what are the antagonisms between the capitalist and the proletariat? Well, in its most basic form, You're going to see more of this from Marx, actually. That you have the capitalists who own the means of production, and they exploit the labor of the worker to gain profit, to gain profit off of your labor. And they give you back what's called the wage for your labor. And that wage is not sufficient to actually be able to survive on your own, which does make you dependent to the state and dependent to the capitalists. And so you have to keep selling your labor to keep getting a wage. And of course, the wage worker is the working class or the proletariat. And that system inherently cannot come together, because even under the most bare bones, naked capitalist system, you have someone that is exploiting you for your labor for profit, and you as the proletariat are obviously going to want the full wages of your labor, the full fruit of your labor, and you're going to want as much as that wage back. But because through your wage is how capitalists make money, there is a contradiction there. Capitalists want to keep all the money, and you as a worker want to keep all of your wages. So that cannot come together under any system. And so when Lenin, who is actually quoting Engels quite, I would say excessively, but is quoting Engels mostly from their book, let me see, The Origin of the Family, Private Property, and the State. And I'm also going to be reading the quote that Lenin used in State and Revolution. What happens when these classes come together, that makes this thing called the state. And as Engels said, the state is, therefore, by no means a power forced on society from without, just as little as is it the reality of the ethical idea, the image of the reality of reason, as Hegel maintains. Rather, it is a product of a society at a certain stage of development. It is the admission that this society has become entangled in an insoluble contradiction with itself, that it has split into irreconcilable antagonisms which it is powerless to dispel. But in order that these antagonisms, these classes with conflicting economic interests, might not consume themselves in society in fruitless struggle, it became necessary to have a power seemingly standing above society that would alleviate the conflict and keep it within the bounds of order. And this power, arisen out of society, but places itself above it and alienating itself more and more from it, is the state. And that is how we start getting into, so we have this weird, power of some kind that raises itself out of class antagonisms to then try to reconcile class antagonisms. So how does it reconcile that? Well, this is where we start getting into the police. And this is actually section 2 of State and Revolution. It's literally titled Special Bodies of Armed Men, Prisons, etc., where the state will use these special bodies of armed men, aka police, cops, whatever you want to call them, and they will use violence. They'll use coercion, they will use whatever means that the state will provide them, aka the capitalist class will provide them, to try and maintain the capitalist structure. Because since the capitalist class is the ruling class, they're the ones with all the money, they're the ones with all the say, they're going to pay the police, they're going to fund the police. That's why you see that a lot of corporations throughout history have either A, had their own personal police forces, literally, or B, are a lot of big donors to police forces today. That's why you're always seeing these random companies like Nestle or like McDonald's or something, like straight up like just donating and funding certain police departments and police forces all across the country, because these are the capitalists, these are the corporations, these are the people with the money that are funneling it into these sources of violence, And of course, a famous example is the fruit company, which is where we literally get the term Banana Republic from. That, they had a standing army that went and impressed this, country. I think it was in Guatemala, if I'm not mistaken. And they, they had these armies that went around and killed people. They, terrorized people and things like that. That's how that happened. This is not like a fluke or some weird, anomaly of the system. That is directly what ends up happening. And so these special bodies of armed men, the police, end up coming into conflict with the proletariat's version of being armed, right? Because, we're not going to sit by and let this happen. So we get these conflict yet again between the police and revolutionaries, between those who want to protect their communities and protect their, protect their fellow working class citizens and things like that. But of course, the state being the state and being funded as it is, the police tend to overpower whatever ability or whatever, militia, army, whatever can be formed by the working class. But all of that ends up culminating more and more and more into the simple fact that, A, the proletariat must take over the state, primarily. That's like part number one. Proletariat must take over the state. Two, when the state is taken over, it must wither away, because as stated in State and Revolution, Lenin quotes from Engels. I think the quote in particular is actually quite long a bit. But basically what it says is like, when the proletariat takes over the state, it stops existing as a state, and it ends up becoming a proletarian state. And Lenin argues that it is this proletarian state that will end up withering away, because if the proletariats take over the state and they get rid of the capitalist class, there will be no need to have a state at all, because there will be no more classes, basically. And so taking over the state is the first thing that we got to do. But how are we going to take over the state? We can't just take it over. We're not anarchists here. We know it doesn't just happen overnight. So how do you do that? And that leads us to the inevitable conclusion that we must have violent revolution, and specifically violent revolution. And a lot of people are going like, okay, so how do we jump all the way to like violence though? Why can't we do a peaceful protest? Why can't we reform things? Why can't we talk it out or something? Like, why can't we not come to anything else? Well, basically, I have multiple examples-ish, I guess you could say. Number one, you cannot reform your way out of this. In fact, someone wrote about this. Rosa Luxemburg wrote about Reform and Revolution, where basically the main idea is that the state, and by far the capitalist class, will not let itself be lovingly pushed out of power. Your oppressor is not going to just be like, oh yeah, I'm oppressing you. Yeah, I should probably stop doing that, huh? This is not going to happen. No king has ever stepped down from his throne. No dictator has ever stepped down out of office. No, any sort of power, no slave owner has just been like, yeah, all of my slaves are equal to me now. Like, that has never happened. Have some of them treated their peasants and slaves and servants nicer than others? Yes, sure, but only within a certain limit. Because capitalist society, even an ideal capitalist society, still treats their workers pretty well. This is something I think I hit on a little bit before, where it's like, we aren't to confuse, I think it's from Lenin, where he's like, we shouldn't confuse social progress with progressing socialism, because even under ideal capitalist society, there's still, workers' rights, there's still women's rights, there's still, immigrant rights. Like, even if all of this wasn't happening with ICE and so on and so forth, we would still be under a capitalist society that's exploiting us. So we can't, even in the best possible capitalist society, it's still exploitative at its core. And you cannot reconcile that, because, again, the state itself exists because there is an irreconcilability of the classes. The capitalist wants to take all your labor, your wage labor, and you, as the laborer, want to keep all the wages of your labor. That something has to give there. And so we cannot reform our way out of this. We also cannot peacefully protest or civil disobedience our way out of this, because in the time when civil disobedience was used in the civil rights movement, that at the time was a novel idea, but it's not anymore. I refer back particularly to George Jackson in his book Blood in My Eye. I couldn't find the exact point, but he refers to at a point in his book where he says that we are not to play patty cake for revolution, right? He basically just straight up tells you, like, now the time for all this pamphlet passing, all of this protesting, all of this electoralism stuff is over. And he said this back in like the 1960s. Like, he was like, it's over. It's over now. You don't have time to play electoral politics. We don't have time to play with pamphlets. We don't have time to play with newspapers. We don't have time to, I just like the phrase, like he just says, we don't have time to patty cake with revolution. We have to get our boots down on the ground and put guns in some hands and put some cadre on the street or something. And we have to really get down and fight this thing, and that's what a good chunk of his book is about as well. And so I also have the additional example of point to any time in history where people have reformed their way out of something at all. Can anyone, any hands in the classroom would like to be raised? And you think of any moments in the entirety of human history where we just reformed our way out of it? No. Like, we learn day after day after day after day in history class, even in our incomplete propaganda fucking crazy history classes we get in here, they teach us all the time that, when empires rise and empires fall, there is war. Every time a society has progressed from one part of the society into a new part of society, it has, been violent. In fact, I have a little bit of a quote here. So we have a tiny little quote, a part of a quote that Marx wrote, or his Engels. No, it's his Engels about something that Marx wrote in the book that Lynn wrote. He says, the force, however, plays yet another role other than that of a dialectical power in history, a revolutionary role. That is the words of Marx, and is, in the words of Marx, it is the midwife of every old society which is pregnant with a new one. That is the instrument with which social movement forces its way through and shatters the old fossilized political forms. Of this, there is no word in here during. It is only with sighs and groans that he admits the possibility that force will perhaps be necessary for the overthrow of an economy based on exploitation. Unfortunately, because all use of force demoralizes, he says, the person who uses it. In Germany, here is violent collision, which may, after all, be forced on the people, which at least have the advantage of wiping out the servility which has penetrated the nation's mentality following the humiliation of the 30 Years' War. And this person's mode of thought, dull, insipid, and impudent, presumes to impose itself on the most revolutionary party that history has ever known. And so basically, Engels is saying there, just to put it in more modern language, that in Herr Göring, which is one of Marx's earliest works, even Marx was sort of like, not happy at the idea of being like, violent revolution must be a thing. And I think many revolutionaries always acknowledge when they get to this point that violent revolution is not a fun idea, right? Like, even Marx himself, as Engels said, he sort of groans and moans that maybe violent revolution is the answer, guys. I don't really know. I mean, I'm kind of like the guy that maybe wrote this or not. I don't know. Like, it's not a fun reality to just go like, yeah, we might have to fight people and we might have to die. Like, that's not fun. But it is always the reality nonetheless. And you see it throughout history all the time. People have tried time and time again here in the United States. Prime example, civil rights movement. People tried and tried and tried to do it as peacefully as possible. And what were they met with? They were met with hoses. They were met with dogs. They were met with police officers beating them. They were met with people, especially in the South, they were met with mobs of white people threatening to lynch them, did lynch them, beat them, put cigarettes out in the back of their necks when they did sit-ins. Even if, you are peaceful, violence will be enacted upon you. Period. It just will happen. That is just how the state works, and that is how it enforces itself, and that is how it subjugates the working class. And so it's only after a certain period of time that you can keep beating on someone, right? We see that prime example with Palestine. You can't just subject an entire nation of people for 75 years to constant, genocide, colonization, forcing them out of their homes, and expect nothing to happen. Everything we see happening is happening for a reason, and all of it is because of exploitation. And so that brings me to, this rounding off, what is it that we are seeing, right? And it's from what we are seeing is how we know what is to be done. But what we are seeing, the death throes of a fascist, late-stage capitalist society. And we have seen this before. This is a story, I wouldn't say as old as time, but this particular story has been told before, right? Let's think back to 1930s on a nice little continent called Europe, in a little country called Germany. They went through this. They had their SAs, they had their Gestapo, they had their SS, they had their brown shirts, they had their black boots. They had all these guys marching up and down the street, destroying, vandalizing Jewish storefronts. When it got bad enough, people were getting kidnapped out of their home, taken out of their home. Entire communities of Jewish citizens were taken and then pushed into ghettos, to which they were then pushed into detention centers, which were actually concentration camps where they killed them. And a lot of people, will compare ICE to the SA, but really, the way that it should be going is that the SA should be being compared to ICE because Germany got that from us. We have done this before with Nico, bringing up how, everyone's weirdly dying in these detention centers, concentration camps. That's where we got it from the British, and then the Germans got it from us. And then you have, Ash talking about how that one woman was injected with some mysterious chemical. They don't know what they injected her with. That rings true with how we treated immigrants back then, where in Texas, we were gassing immigrants. We were giving them gas baths and stuff. The whole idea of using Zyklon B came from Texas immigration policies. They would take them in these rooms, they would strip them down, they would gas them, trying to say they were these infected insects that shouldn't be coming into our country. All this stuff, all this rhetoric was said and done before. And then, and then we see it all again today, and we see where it leads to. We see with the rise and fall of Nazi Germany, what happens when we don't fight back, what happens when we just allow this to happen, when we keep trying to convince ourselves that we can vote this out, that we can reform our way out of it, that we can peacefully protest our way out of this, when the people who are doing this literally are killing us and want to kill you. At the end of the day, these people don't see you as human. That's the sad part. Us on the left, we tend to try not to dehumanize people, right? But it's these people live off of dehumanization. You can't do this knowing fully in your mind that the people you are doing this to are other human beings that have the right to live and breathe and be happy. That just isn't going to work. And so that basically leads to, the question that we present ourselves with: what is to be done? But what is to be done is that, one, you must consider what are things that you can do, right? What you can do now? Not everyone can just get up, grab a gun, and just go, right? Some of us are disabled. Some of us are old. Some of us have kids. Some of us have other responsibilities. So what you can do for at least now is try to form and connect with your community. Get in contact with local organizations. Get in contact with people that are able-bodied, have the mental and physical capacity, time, and money to do this stuff, and get in contact with these people. Talk to them about this stuff. Inform them about these things. You are not the only communist in your small town. You're not the only communist in your city. And I hate to be this type of person, but the time for excuses is over. I hear so many times, well, I live in a small town in Oklahoma. And it's you're not the only communist in Oklahoma. I promise you're not. You're not the only communist in your small town. If your small town, 150 people can produce you, there is someone else in that town that's probably at least a little bit left-leaning. Even a little bit, right? Go to the library, download some PDFs, go to the library and print some stuff out and read. You don't have to even print stuff out unless you're the person who needs physical books. You can just, get a PDF of something, read something, And when you're done the reading, you need to go do the practice. You need to join a community center. You need to join a community work group. Maybe if you can afford it, you might even need to go to your local gun range and probably do some little bit of practicing. You can start off how the Black Panther started off. You can get a community defense going, and you can try to talk to your fellow comrades, trusted people, about different systems of communication, different ways that you are going to communicate to each other in times of crisis and in times of peace. And for those of you that are really, really well connected and really, really, advanced in your organization, you all can start operating with other political groups. Because I know some people probably live in places where like the most left-leaning group they have like the DSA or something. I hate to be that person, but you might need to go in there and talk to some of those people, okay? Those people have connections. Those people have people that you can talk to, or people you could probably even personally convince yourself if you try hard enough that, like, hey, these people have connections within political circles. Utilize that. Use that, right? Because as much as I do not like Mom Donnie, actually, he got there somehow. He didn't just pop up there yesterday, So it's really one of those things where it's like, you gotta start somewhere. And the best place is to start, the best time to start now. And the next best time to start was yesterday. So just get started. Do something. We are literally in the please do something phase of this now. Because all the times of, we're doing this for harm reduction. We're doing this for, we gotta, work with people. We don't have that time anymore. That was all borrowed time, and now it's starting to run out, right? Because people are dying. People are getting shot in the middle of the street. People are, getting disappeared. And one thing that I don't think that a lot of people have clocked yet, they feel it, but they haven't clocked it yet, is that privilege is running short. A lot of people, here, podcast, we have femmes, and we see very clearly that some of the femmes here are white. But they are also communists. They are leftists. If they were to stand between police and an immigrant, they would get shot. We saw it with Renee Good. She was a white woman. She could have just gotten her, she could have just cried, right? She could have just done so many different things, but because she stood in the way of the state, she stood in the way of justice, she was shot dead for it. Same thing with Alex Preddy. He was a white man. He was a white man. And they shot him dead because he opposed the state. And I think that's what a lot of that, why their deaths in particular get a lot of attention beyond them just being white. Because a lot of white people are realizing that if you are even somewhat against this, there are Republicans, there are government officials, there are entire government agencies that are ready to lie about you and take away your privileges and make you out to be a horrifying leftist, whatever monster. Terrorist, radical, whatever word you want to use, right? Like when I say time is running out, I seriously mean it. You just even being slightly opposed to this administration is enough, as we see, to have a death warrant, right? Because if you weren't already in a group of undesirables, you will be, right? You've been saying this. Black people have been warning you. Disabled people have been warning you. Gay people have been warning you since forever, and it is happening. So if you're in a bit of a bummed out mood, if you're in a bit of a scared mood, that's completely understandable. But the only way that we are going to see this through is that we are brave, we have solidarity, we come together and we go, hey, sister, I see you. Hey, comrade, I see you. And you need to get to working. You need to put some boots on the ground and do something. If there's nothing else to get out of here, please do something. Even if it's just like starting to work out or something. Do something.
No, absolutely. Do something, y'all. All of us need to be doing something. And I guess that wraps up pretty much what we were going to talk about today. I did want to give a few moments if anyone wants to say something before we finalize everything. Go for it, Ash.
I want to encourage everybody to see if you have a rapid response in your area. And contact them. They can train you to be a legal observer. Also, even if you're not signed up with them, you can call, you can email. They will give you red and yellow cards that you can pass out to your community, bring them to local businesses, leave them on doorsteps, leave them everywhere. Those cards, even if you don't have a rapid response in your area, you can still download the cards. What they are instructions on what people should say if they are contacted by the police or ICE. And then also there should be other resources on there. Also, everyone needs to check and see if you have organizations in your area that are fighting against ICE. There are dozens and dozens of grassroots movements popping up all over the place. They really, really need support. Check in with your local colleges if you can't find anywhere. The student unions generally will know.
No, that's great advice. All right. I was going to say, I just want to take this small moment since we're talking about things that need to get done. Ash and Crazy both gave you great resources on how to get started. I'd just like to make a little reminder that, if you're not a Marxist-Leninist and you want to sit here and judge us, Marxist-Leninists are the only people who have historically have done something. We've done something. We are the only left political theorists that have always maintained the liberation of oppressed people, particularly the people who are affected the most right now, people of Africa and South America and Central America. So take a moment, humble yourself, do something, and we'll talk to you next time. Have a nice night, y'all.
Night.